There's a world out there that used to be our world. Somewhere beneath the candy-colored hills and the talking dogs and the vampire queens playing bass guitar in the dark, there are ruins, old ruins, human ruins, shopping malls half buried in moss and vines, highways that crack and split under the weight of 1,000 years of silence, and the faint, faded outlines of a civilization that was here, that was ours, and then was gone. The land of Ooh sits on top of everything we ever built, and it never tells you the whole story. It gives you fragments, glimpses, a rusted car here, a crumbling skyscraper there, a half-legible copyright warning on a VHS tape that hasn't been rewound since before the world ended. Adventure Time ran for 10 seasons, countless specials, multiple miniseries, a series of graphic novels, and eventually span off into Fiona and Cake. It is one of the most beloved animated shows ever made, and it is absolutely stuffed to the seams with mysteries that were never fully resolved, questions that were never completely answered, and lore so deep and interconnected that even the show's own creators have admitted they did not always know where it was going. Tonight, we're going to sit with every single one of those mysteries. We're going to move through them slowly, carefully, the way you might walk through a museum after closing time, when all the lights are low and the exhibits feel like they belong to you alone. We are going to talk about nuclear war and ancient crowns, about evil older than time itself, about a penguin who used to rule the solar system, and a dog who was born from a magical cyst on his father's head. We are going to talk about 1,000 years of loneliness, about parents who abandon their children, about gods who look like babies and chaos that wears the shape of a red, cubic-headed monster. And throughout all of it, I want you to remember something. Adventure Time told you in the very first episode, in that brief flash of the opening title sequence, in the rusted bombs and the charred landscape before the camera, sweeps down to show you the green hills and the candy castles. This used to be us. All of this, and we never found out exactly why we lost it. Get comfortable. We have a lot of ground to cover, and none of it is in a hurry. Let the questions breathe. That is where the interesting stuff lives. Part 1. The Land of Ooh and the Secrets Buried Beneath It. Ooh is gorgeous. That is the first thing you notice. The soft, rounded hills that glow in late afternoon light, the bubbly architecture of the Candy Kingdom with its pink towers and its caramel ramparts, the vast blue oceans, the strange and dreaming forests where the trees have faces and the grass makes a sound like breathing when the wind moves through it. It is a world that feels like childhood distilled, like someone took every half-remembered dream from your early years and assembled them into geography. But look a little closer. Look past the peppermint mountains and the glassy lakes and the cheerfully painted bakeries. Start noticing what is wedged between the fairy tale elements, half visible, half forgotten, the way an old bruise shows through new skin. There are bones everywhere in Oot. Not the cartoon kind, not the goofy, rattling skeleton kind, but actual remnants, actual evidence that something happened here a long time ago and the world has not entirely healed from it yet. Old military aircraft half buried in hillsides, pre-war machinery repurposed by candy people who have no idea what it originally did. Electrical towers standing empty and rusted in the middle of meadows, their lines long gone, their purpose forgotten. Monuments to a grid that nobody alive has ever seen in operation. Finn and Jake live in a treehouse. It is a cozy, wonderful treehouse, and it is their home. And it sits at the center of their adventures for most of the show's run. But that treehouse is built in a place that used to be something else. The whole of Ooh is built in a place that used to be something else. The show never lets you forget that entirely. Even at its most whimsical, even when it is doing an episode about a party for a favorite snail, or a misunderstanding over a missing pie, there's that quiet undertone. that background hum of history that has not been processed. What we know, pieced together from 1,000 episodes of careful watching, is this. The land of Oo is a future version of Earth. Not an alternate Earth, not a parallel dimension, but our Earth, this one, roughly 1,000 years from now. The civilization we built, the cities and the highways and the internet, and the hospitals and the movie studios, all of it is gone. What replaced it is something stranger and more beautiful and fundamentally more dangerous. A world where the rules of physics got bent by whatever catastrophe ended the old one. Where magical energy seeped up from the cracks in reality and filled the spaces left by science. Where candy is alive and rainicorns speak Korean, and the sky sometimes has feelings about things. The show is very careful about what it tells you directly. Pendleton Ward, the creator, has spoken in interviews about how the backstory of Oo was always meant to be glimpsed rather than explained. He wanted the ruins to feel real without turning the show into a lecture about geopolitics. He wanted you to feel the weight of what was lost without being required to understand all the mechanics of how it was lost. This is honestly a brilliant creative choice. The mystery makes the world feel bigger. Every fragment you find raises 10 more questions, and the questions make you care. But it also means that some things never get resolved. The history of Oo has gaps in it that you could park a continent in, and those gaps are not oversights. They are invitations. They are the show saying, here is the shape of a door. Now imagine what is on the other side. One of the most persistent, unresolved elements is the geography itself. We see Oo from above sometimes, and it becomes clear that it occupies what used to be North America, roughly. The treehouse sits in what was once the Midwestern United States, or somewhere thereabouts. There is a continent visible in some establishing shots that matches the general shape of the eastern seaboard, if you squint and account for whatever the Mushroom War did to the coastlines. But the world has changed dramatically in ways that go beyond cultural. The oceans are in different places. There are new mountain ranges. The chunk that Finn notices is missing from the planet in certain aerial views. That gaping wound in the side of the Earth that appears multiple times and is never explained. Something hit this planet. Something big hit this planet, and the show is not entirely sure it was the war. The background details reward obsessive attention in ways that most shows never attempt. An episode set in Marceline's house reveals family photographs, newspaper clippings from before the war, emotional artifacts of a life that existed before everything changed. In the episode about Bonnabelle Bubblegum's early years, the camera lingers on a gas station full of pre-war objects, including a poster with a mushroom cloud on it and the words "Never Forget." Someone put that poster up. Someone in Oo's past wanted their descendants to remember what happened. But then time did what time does. And the candy people were born, and the humans mostly left. And the forgetting happened anyway, slow and gentle and complete. The show sometimes acknowledges this amnesia directly. Princess Bubblegum, who is 800 years old and was alive when Oo was still figuring out what it was, maintains an academic interest in pre-war history that borders on obsessive. Her scientific laboratories are full of preserved specimens and careful records. She is one of the few beings in Oo who seems to genuinely understand that the world they live in is built on something that ended violently, and this understanding shapes everything she does. Her need for control, her suspicion of chaos, her compulsive documentation of everything around her. Marceline is older than Bubblegum by a couple of centuries, and she carries the pre-war world inside her, the way old people carry their childhoods. Not as information, but as sensation. She was there. She walked through the ruins while they were still warm. She knows what a working refrigerator looked like because she owned one. She knows what gas stations and convenience stores and apartment buildings felt like because she lived among them. In their decay, in their slow dissolution into something else. And then there is Simon Patrikov, who was there before any of them in terms of consciousness and sanity, who wrote video diaries in the ruins, his voice already starting to crack with the crown's influence, documenting the end of the world as an academic exercise, even as it was happening to him personally. The world of Ooh is haunted. It is haunted the way all places that have survived catastrophe are haunted. Not by supernatural ghosts necessarily, but by the weight of what used to be, by the silence where something loud used to live. And that haunting is the foundation of every mystery the show ever offered you. Because before you can understand any of the specific questions, the Lich, the Crown, Golby, the Comets, you have to understand that everything in Adventure Time is downstream of one enormous event that the show spent 10 seasons circling without ever fully landing on. Consider the opening sequence. Every single episode of Adventure Time begins the same way. The camera starts in space, sweeps down through the clouds, briefly shows you a landscape of devastation, half-buried tanks, and military hardware, and the unmistakable geometry of human catastrophe, and then transitions into the lush green hills and bouncy adventures of the actual show. It is a blink and you miss it moment. A child watching casually might not notice it at all, might just register it as a stylized transition, an aesthetic flourish. But it is not. It is the show telling you every single time what everything is built on. The opening title card is the only consistently honest thing the show ever says about its own history. Here is what happened, it says. Here is the thing underneath. Now let us show you the Candy Castle. Pendleton Ward has discussed in various interviews the way Adventure Time grew from a simple, goofy cartoon concept into something with genuine emotional weight and complex mythology. The early seasons really are relatively loose, relatively light. Episodes about Finn and Jake going on adventures, rescuing princesses, fighting monsters, being 12 and energetic and uncomplicated. The darkness is present but distant in those early days. The ruins are there if you look, but you are not required to look. Then the show started rewarding people who looked. The coffee shop scene in I Remember You, when Simon and young Marceline sit across from each other and you realize what you are watching, the last lucid moments of a man who is losing himself, recorded in a song that both of them have forgotten the origin of, but both of them feel in ways they cannot explain, is one of the most powerful pieces of animation ever produced. It landed that hard because the show had been quietly building to it for seasons. Every Ice King joke, every hapless kidnapping attempt, every moment of Simon being oblivious and ridiculous and occasionally genuinely frightening was preparation for the moment when you understood what all of it cost. That is the architecture of how Adventure Time handles its mysteries. It shows you the surface for a long time. It lets you get comfortable with the surface. And then it shows you what is underneath. And the underneath changes everything you thought you knew about the surface. And none of the individual pieces were false. They were just incomplete. And the completion arrives like a wave and takes your breath. Not every mystery gets this treatment. Not everything is given a revelatory moment that recontextualizes it. Some mysteries are just shown to you, and then the camera moves on, and you are left holding a question that has no answer waiting for it in the show's archive. And these are, in their own way, just as valuable. The questions that have no answers in a story you love are the places where that story becomes collaborative, where your imagination is consciously invited to participate, where you become the author of the next chapter. Ooh is designed to be that kind of space. Not just a world to watch, but a world to think about in the dark. When the episode is over and the screen is off and you are lying there turning things over. The Mushroom War. The thing that ended us. The thing that made Ooh possible. Part 2. The Great Mushroom War and the question nobody can fully answer. Here's what we know, and it is less than you might think. Roughly 1,000 years before Finn's adventures, there was a war, a global war. The kind of war that uses nuclear weapons, that deploys mushroom cloud bombs across multiple continents simultaneously, that fundamentally and permanently alters the chemical and physical composition of the planet it is fought on. The show calls it the Great Mushroom War, and the name is not subtle. Mushroom clouds, radiation, the specific kind of devastation that turns cities into archaeological sites overnight. The war destroyed almost everything. Not just cities and infrastructure, not just governments and institutions, but the entire framework of human civilization as it existed. The population collapsed to near zero, the survivors scattered. Some made it to islands offshore, isolated communities that maintained a kind of fragile continuity, keeping themselves alive, keeping their human form and their human culture mostly intact. Others stayed on the main continent and changed, transformed by whatever the war put into the atmosphere, the soil, the water, absorbing the strange energies that the war released and becoming something new. And what the war released, beyond the obvious nuclear devastation, was magic. This is a detail that Adventure Time handles with fascinating obliqueness. There seems to have been some kind of magical element to the Mushroom War, or at least to the bomb that concluded it. Not just radiation, but something else, something that soaked into the ground and the air and the biology of every living thing that survived. Something that reactivated dormant potential in the world that science had been suppressing or simply ignoring for centuries. The mutagenic bomb that was dropped at what appears to have been the end of the conflict, a bomb that created the Lich, was not a standard nuclear weapon. It had something extra in it. Something alive, or something that awakened something alive. The origins of that bomb are never fully explained. We get hints. In the episode Finn the Human, when Finn uses his wish through Prismo to unmake the Lich, we see the Farm World timeline, a version of history where Simon Petrikov used the power of the Ice Crown to freeze the mushroom bomb in midair before it could detonate. In that world, the war still happened. The bombs still fell, cities still burned. But the specific mutagenic bomb, the one that created the Lich, never went off. And in that world, without the Lich and without the magical contamination, Ooh never became Ooh. The creatures that populate it never gained sentience. The magic never fully saturated the world. It remained a ruined Earth struggling to recover, inhabited by scattered human survivors, recognizable as a post-apocalyptic landscape rather than as a fantasy kingdom. This suggests something crucial. The Mushroom War was, at its core, a human conflict. It was probably World War III. It was probably nuclear. The show places it somewhere between the late 20th and early 21st century based on Simon Petrikov watching Cheers on television and other period markers, which means it happened to a world that looks like ours, that thought the way we think, that made the same kind of politics and the same kind of weapons, and the same kind of catastrophic mistakes. The war itself was human-caused in the most mundane and depressing sense. People fought. Countries used their worst weapons. The planet paid. But the mutagenic bomb was something different. That specific weapon, the one with the mushroom cloud that glows green in the episode flashbacks, the one whose detonation released the Lich into the world, that was not standard nuclear weaponry. Its creation, its deployment, its specific effects, none of that is ever explained. We never know who made it. We never know who authorized its use. We never know whether its magical component was intentional, an early attempt at weaponizing the magical energies that were apparently beginning to return to the world, or whether it was accidental, a nuclear device that happened to strike a node of old magical power and combined with something it was never meant to touch? This question matters more than it might seem because the answer would tell us something fundamental about the world. If the mutagenic bomb was created with magical intent, it means there were people before the war who knew about magic, who were already working with it, who understood what they were doing in some partial way, even if they did not understand the full consequences. If it was accidental, it means the magic was already there, already seeping back into the world in ways that pre-war humanity was not aware of. And the bomb simply provided the catastrophic catalyst that released it all at once. The show teases this question most directly in an episode called Evergreen, which is set 65 million years ago during the Cretaceous period. In it, we meet Urgence Evergreen, an ancient ice elemental who is trying to stop a catalyst comet from hitting the Earth. The comet he is trying to stop appears to be a manifestation of the Lich's essence. It glows green. It has horn-shaped flames. It carries a hunger for extinction. And the way the other elementals talk about it, the way they accept its coming as inevitable and necessary rather than purely catastrophic, suggests that this kind of event, a catalyst arriving from space and changing the world, has happened before and will happen again. We will get to the catalyst comets in their own section. But the point here is that the Mushroom War and its strange bomb did not happen in a vacuum. The magical history of the world is far longer and stranger than the 1,000-year span that covers, and the war was not the beginning of that history, but rather one entry in a much longer story of the world being periodically transformed by forces that humanity barely understood. What started the war, specifically in political and human terms? Unknown. The show does not tell us and likely never will, partly for creative reasons around not making a children's show about actual contemporary geopolitics, and partly because honestly the cause does not matter as much as the consequence. People fought. The world ended. Something that was already coming, already building in the deep architecture of the Earth, got released. There's a theory, well supported by careful episode analysis, that the Mushroom War was at least partially accelerated by the Ice Crown. Simon Petrikov's video diaries, recorded in the period just before the war's conclusion, show a window outside his apartment where the climate is visibly and rapidly changing. The world outside is becoming colder, wider, more dangerous, at a pace that seems impossible even for a brutal winter. This is the Crown working through Simon, his ice powers beginning to leak out and affect his environment. The first experiments of a force that would eventually transform him into a figure who can blanket a continent in snow without thinking about it. If the Crown was already affecting the global climate in Simon's early wearing of it, and if climate disruption on a sufficient scale destabilizes food supplies and political stability and the fragile agreements that hold nations back from using their worst weapons, then Simon Petrikov, gentle antiquarian, may have inadvertently contributed to the end of civilization while trying desperately to hold on to himself. This is a speculation, not a confirmed canon element. But the show plants this possibility carefully enough that dismissing it feels like not paying attention. What we are more certain about is the aftermath, the period immediately following the war's conclusion. The era that Simon and Marceline share is shown in fragments that build into something devastating. The cities are ruins. The monsters roam, green and glistening and hungry, the mutagenic residue of whatever the bomb released taking the form of creatures that move through the rubble. Human survivors, those who did not die from the bombs or the radiation or the monsters, huddle in whatever shelter they can find, trying to make sense of a world that has stopped making sense. Simon is present for all of this. The show's most haunting depictions of the post-war period come through Simon's eyes, filtered through the growing madness of the Crown, given to us in those careful, crumbling video diary entries. He knows he is losing himself. He uses the act of recording as a tether. Each diary is a message to Betty, to the woman he loves who is not there. A message he is increasingly not sure she will ever receive, in a language he is not sure he will continue to speak. He talks about the monsters. He talks about the cold. He talks about staying Simon. He sings the theme from Cheers because it is something familiar in a world that has become unrecognizable. And the music is both pathetic and heroic in the same breath, because staying connected to something small and human and gentle when the world is ended is not pathetic at all. There is also the question of what the war did to the planet's physical geography, the chunk missing from the Earth visible in certain episodes, the new ocean where there was not one, the mountain ranges that appear in locations where mountains were not known to exist. These are not explained by standard nuclear warfare, which is catastrophically destructive but does not typically rearrange continental geography. Something happened to the physical planet, not just its civilization. Something that shook the Earth deeply enough to change its shape. The mutagenic bomb is the obvious candidate. A weapon that could create the Lich from latent magical substrate could presumably do things to physical geography as well, especially if the magical energies it released altered the geological rules of the world in addition to the biological ones. But the specifics of how and why and how much are never addressed. The world of Ooh simply has its geography, and the geography is different from ours, and the show never pauses to fully reconcile the two. There is one more piece of this mystery worth sitting with because it is quietly devastating. We know from Simon Petrikov's video diaries that he was alive when the war happened. He was a young academic, a professional antiquarian who studied ancient artifacts, who had a girlfriend named Betty Groff, who wore glasses and had dark hair and was genuinely excited about old things, about history, about the way the past left its fingerprints on the present. He was, in other words, completely ordinary. He was us. He found the crown before the war ended. He was already transforming when the bombs fell. By the time Marceline encountered him in the ruins of a city, a small girl alone in the rubble, he was already losing himself, already becoming something else, but not yet gone. Not yet entirely the Ice King. Still Simon enough to take care of a child. Still Simon enough to sing the Cheers theme song in a cracked off-key voice that is simultaneously funny and heartbreaking, because you know what it means. He is holding on to something. He is using the last threads of himself to keep a little girl from being afraid. The war made Ooh, but it also made this. And this, the specific tragedy of Simon Petrikov, might be the purest expression of what the war was. Not a political event, not a military conflict, a human catastrophe in the most intimate sense. Something that broke a gentle, bookish man in a quiet, irreversible way and left the wreckage wandering around for 1,000 years, causing chaos, writing fan fiction, occasionally being funny about it. Hey, if you have made it this far and you are getting sleepy, that is exactly what is supposed to happen. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you are right now and what time it is there. Whether you are wrapped up in a blanket at 2 in the morning or listening to this on a lazy afternoon, I want to know. And if you are not subscribed yet, please do. It genuinely means the world, and it helps more than you know. Part 3. The Lich. Evil that predates everything. Before there was time, there was something waiting. That is the implication buried in an episode called Gold Stars, in which the Lich, currently inhabiting the body of a baby named Sweet Pea, makes a statement so casually horrifying that you might miss it in its context. He implies that he is not merely ancient, not merely old in the way that even long-lived creatures like Marceline or Simon are old, but old in a way that precedes the existence of the universe itself. A survivor, he suggests, from a time before there was nothing. Let that sit for a moment. Before there was nothing. That is a sentence that breaks logic in the most interesting possible way. Nothing is the absence of everything, the most minimal possible state of existence. To exist before nothing existed requires you to occupy a conceptual space that language barely has words for. The Lich claims this origin, and the show never contradicts him, which either means the writers were being deliberately provocative with their villain's backstory, or they were making a genuinely cosmic statement about the nature of evil. The Lich is, for most of Adventure Time, the central villain. He is the first truly frightening thing the show ever presents to you. He looks like a skeleton wrapped in dark robes, like a lich in the classic fantasy sense, except that his empty eye sockets glow green with an energy that feels ancient and contaminating and deeply wrong. When he speaks, his voice, provided by Ron Perlman, sounds like something scraping against the inside of reality. He talks about the death of all things with the calm certainty of someone who has been studying a map and knows exactly where the destination is. His goal, stated simply, is the extinction of all life. Not power over life, not the domination of civilization, the end of everything living, everything. He is not interested in ruling a kingdom or accumulating wealth or even in freedom, broadly conceived. He is interested in stopping the biological experiment of existence. He serves a philosophy rather than a desire. And that philosophy is that life is an aberration, a noise in the void, and the void would be better without it. The origin of this philosophy is one of the deepest unresolved questions in the show. What we piece together from multiple episodes across the series is something like this. In the deep history of the universe, before the Earth formed, before the solar system condensed out of a nebula, there were entities that existed in the void. Primordial things, older than matter. The show hints at these beings in multiple ways without ever fully describing them, using the Lich's ancient origins and Golb's pre-temporal existence as reference points. At some point, one of these void entities, the thing that would eventually become the Lich's essence, developed an orientation toward extinction, toward the erasure of the complexity that life creates, toward the clean, cold silence of absolute nothing. This essence, this ancient hunger, got deposited into a catalyst comet. Every 1,000 years, a catalyst comet strikes the Earth, carrying with it some kind of agent of change. Sometimes the change is creation. Sometimes it is destruction. The first known time a catalyst comet carrying the Lich's essence struck the Earth was 65 million years ago during the Cretaceous period, and the result was the extinction of the dinosaurs. Not a metaphor, not an approximation. The actual KT extinction event, the one that wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs and cleared the way for mammals, is presented in Adventure Time as having been caused by an entity of pure destructive intent riding a cosmic rock into the planet, which is honestly a brilliant piece of world building because it takes a real historical event and reframes it as part of a narrative without contradicting the scientific facts. The Lich did not replace the asteroid with magic. The Lich was the asteroid, or rather, the Lich's essence was carried by the asteroid, and the extinction it caused was the intended effect. Change of the most violent possible kind. The Lich should not have survived the next million years. His physical form, such as it was, should have been dispersed by the impact and the long, slow recovery of the Earth. But he did not fully arrive at his final form until the Mushroom War, roughly 1,000 years before Finn's story. The mutagenic bomb detonated in what appears to have been the ruins of New York City, or somewhere in the northeastern United States. And when it did, it released the latent Lich energy that had been building in the Earth's magical substrate for millions of years. The Lich possessed a person who had been submerged in the mutagenic waste. He possessed them, consumed them, wore their transformed body like a suit, and then he walked into the new world as its first and most ancient predator. He spent roughly 1,000 years moving through gathering power, waiting. The show is frustratingly vague about what exactly he was doing during those centuries. We know Billy fought him at some point and apparently defeated him, sealing him in amber in a well of power beneath the Candy Kingdom. We know he was down there for some significant portion of Oo's existence, not active but not gone, dreaming his extinction dreams in the dark. The show's first major season-long arc involves him breaking free from that imprisonment and making his move toward the Enchiridion, toward Prismo's room, toward his wish for the death of all living things. What the show never tells you is how the Lich's essence got from the dinosaur-killing comet to the Mushroom War's mutagenic bomb. There is a gap there of 65 million years during which this ancient evil was somewhere, doing something, waiting. The episodes hint that he was not wholly absent from human history, that his influence was felt in various dark corners of civilization, but the specifics are never detailed. Was he conscious during those millions of years? Was he dormant, a pattern in the geological magic, waiting for a big enough disaster to provide him with a body? Did he have any role in the politics of the pre-war world? Did he nudge events toward their catastrophic conclusion? The question of whether the Lich caused the Mushroom War is perhaps the most unsettling unresolved mystery in the entire series. Because if he did, if the ancient embodiment of extinction engineered humanity's most destructive moment in order to give himself a body, then the Mushroom War was not just a human failure. It was the endgame of a plan that was already in motion before the first human being ever stood upright. Every arms race, every political failure, every moment of civilizational self-destruction was potentially the Lich's fingerprints, invisible, patient, working toward a single catastrophic moment. And if that is true, then the land of Oo, for all its candy-colored beauty, is built on a foundation of deliberate malice. Not just accidental human violence, but the considered ancient strategy of something that has wanted everything dead since before the concept of death existed. There is another dimension to the Lich that the show adds late in its run, and it complicates everything. In the episode featuring Sweet Pea, the reincarnated Lich as a baby, and later in moments of the Farm World arc, we see the Lich's philosophy from the inside. He is not frustrated. He is not angry. He is not even particularly emotional about his goal of extinction. He is, if anything, deeply certain. The world frustrates him with its persistence and its noise and its overwhelming commitment to continuing to exist, but he does not rage against it. He observes it the way a scientist observes a failed experiment. With patience, with the knowledge that eventually the experiment ends. What makes the Lich genuinely terrifying in a way that most fictional villains fail to achieve is that he does not need you to be afraid of him. Most villains derive power from other people's fear. They need the reaction. They are performing their villainy for an audience. The Lich is not performing. He would be exactly the same in an empty room, in a void with no witnesses. His conviction is self-sustaining. He does not need validation. He does not need understanding. He is simply correct, from his perspective, and the fact that everyone else disagrees is just a temporary condition he is working to remedy. The show spends considerable time exploring what happens to the Lich after he is defeated in the Season 5 finale. He is sucked through Prismo's door. He ends up in the Farm World alternate timeline. And there, in the body of a dead, frozen version of his original form, He speaks a monologue that is among the most genuinely chilling pieces of writing the show produced. He has lost the fight. He is in a universe he did not create and cannot control. He is surrounded by people who have stopped him, and he does not care. He is not beaten. He is just waiting. The universe is large and time is patient, and he has both. And then Tree Trunks and Mister Pig adopt the egg he leaves behind, and the baby that hatches from it, Sweet Pea, is the most innocent and gentle presence in the show for years afterward. Sweet Pea does not know what he is. He has Lich DNA and ancient evil in his deep nature, and he grows up learning about kindness from two elderly candy elephants who genuinely love him. The show is asking, through Sweet Pea's existence, whether nature or nurture determines destiny, whether the embodiment of all evil, given the right upbringing, the right love, the right environment, can simply not be that, can simply be a child. The answer is left genuinely ambiguous. Sweet Pea is kind. Sweet Pea is good, as far as we can observe. But in the final episodes, when Golb arrives and chaos saturates the world, there are moments where Sweet Pea's face does something that is not quite childlike, where the deep substrate of the Lich surfaces briefly before sinking again. The implication is not that Sweet Pea is secretly evil. It is that the Lich is in there somewhere, held in check by the love that has been poured into his reincarnated form since the beginning of his new life. Is the Lich still the Lich inside Sweet Pea? Will he always be? Can the embodiment of extinction become, over time, just a person who happens to have unusual heritage? These questions are not answered. They are perhaps unanswerable in the show's own terms. And that ambiguity is the point. The same ambiguity that makes Finn and Jake's friendship meaningful. The idea that you are not merely your origins, but also your choices, applies even here at the most extreme edge of the show's moral universe. The Farm World Lich, the version from the alternate timeline where the mushroom bomb was frozen, says something in the episode Whispers that opens a door the show never fully walks through. He calls himself the last scholar of Golby. Golb, the entity we will discuss in depth shortly. But the connection is significant, because if the Lich is Golb's scholar, if there is a philosophical and perhaps theological relationship between the embodiment of extinction and the embodiment of chaos, then the Lich is not an independent evil, but a servant. A deeply dedicated, cosmically ancient servant of something even larger than himself. Which raises the question of whether the Lich ever really had an independent will at all, or whether his entire billion-year existence has been in service of something he may not even fully understand. That question goes unresolved. The show gives you the shape of it, puts you close enough to smell the depth of it, and then moves on. Which is, honestly, the most Adventure Time thing it could possibly do. Part 4. Simon Petrikov, the Ice Crown, and a mystery 65 million years old. A gentleman walked into the end of the world wearing a magical crown he bought from a dock worker in Scandinavia, and he never fully came back. That is the Simon Petrikov story at its most compressed. But the actual mystery of Simon, the one that unsettles you the longer you look at it, is not about Simon at all. It is about the crown. Because the crown is the bridge between Simon's tragedy and a history so old that the dinosaurs were still around when it was made. Urgence Evergreen was an ice elemental who lived during the Cretaceous period. In terms of the Adventure Time cosmic hierarchy, the elementals were the fundamental magical forces of the world, physical embodiments of the classical elements. Fire and ice and slime and candy, though candy apparently replaced something else in the earliest configuration. Evergreen was ice-like, and he was powerful in the way that primordial forces are powerful, which is to say absolutely and without apology. When the catalyst comet, the green one, the evil one, the one that carried the extinction essence of what would eventually become the Lich, began its approach to Earth, the other elementals treated it as inevitable. Change comes. The comet brings it. This is how the world has always worked, and how it will continue to work. But Evergreen was different. Evergreen looked at the comet and saw not change, but annihilation, and he decided he was not willing to accept annihilation. So he made a crown. He poured his magical knowledge and his desperate intent into a golden object topped with 3 rubies, and he built into it a single purpose. Whoever wore it would have their deepest wish granted. Wear the crown, and whatever you most profoundly want at the core of your being becomes reality. He planned to wear it himself. His deepest wish was to stop the comet. He was the most powerful ice elemental in existence. If he wore the crown, surely his wish would be powerful enough to deflect or destroy the incoming mass of cosmic evil. But Evergreen was incapacitated before he could put it on himself. And his assistant, a small dinosaur he had taken on as an apprentice, a creature he named Gunther, was left alone with the crown and the approaching comet, and no good options. Gunther placed the crown on his head, and Gunther's deepest wish was not to save the world. Gunther's deepest wish was to be like his master, to be Urgent's Evergreen, to have that power, that certainty, that imposing cold authority that his master projected. Gunther admired Evergreen with the desperate, unquestioning admiration of an apprentice who has never been told he is valuable for himself. So the crown made Gunther into a twisted version of Evergreen, raving, blue-skinned, ice-powered, shouting about being the master of ice and snow. And the comet hit, and the dinosaurs died. And the crown survived, carrying inside it the imprint of that first corrupted wish, the permanent memory of what the crown does to people, which is not grant their stated wishes, but their deepest ones. And the two are very rarely the same. The crown passed through hands over the millennia. A boy named Sven wore it briefly. Santa Claus, yes, that Santa Claus, wore it at some point in the past. Various beings encountered it, were affected by it, recovered or did not recover. Each time it was worn, the same transformation threatened. The crown trying to turn its wearer into a version of Evergreen because that is what Gunther wished for. And that wish is the crown's first programming, the deepest instruction in its magical architecture. Then Simon Petrikov found it. Simon was an antiquarian, a scholar of ancient artifacts, the kind of person who gets excited about old things and writes academic papers about them and genuinely believes that understanding the past is one of the most important things a human being can do. He bought the crown in Scandinavia from an old dock worker who probably did not know what he was selling. He brought it home. He and his fiancée Betty took turns trying it on, laughing, being playful about it the way young people are playful about things they do not yet understand are dangerous. And then the vision started, and the voices, and Simon started changing. His skin began to turn blue, his nose grew, his hair whitened, and became a vast and terrible beard. He started saying things he did not mean, feeling impulses he could not explain. He recorded video diaries desperately, trying to document what was happening to him, trying to leave a record for Betty and for himself, trying to hold on to his own identity through the act of narration. The tapes are the saddest artifact in Adventure Time's entire mythology. A man watching himself disappear and making careful notes about it. A man saying, "I love you, Betty. I love you. I am sorry. I do not know what is happening to me, but I'm trying to stay." Betty left. Not out of cruelty, but out of terror. She did not have a framework for understanding what was happening. She was a scientist, a rational person in a world that was not yet offering magic as a legitimate category of experience. She left, and Simon was alone with a crown, and the mushroom war started, and the world ended around him. And somehow the crown kept him alive through all of it, kept him breathing and walking through the ruins while every other human being in his vicinity died. The crown gave him powers: ice and snow, survival, immunity to the radiological contamination that was killing everyone else. But it took his mind in exchange, slowly, incrementally, a memory at a time, a piece of personality at a time. By the time he found little Marceline in the ruins of a city, alone and crying, he was already most of the way to being the Ice King. But some essential Simon persisted. The part of him that recognized a child in distress. The part of him that responded to vulnerability with protection rather than predation. He took care of Marceline. He sang to her. He gave her a stuffed toy he named Hambo. He stayed Simon, barely, by loving someone. And then even that was gone. The Ice King does not remember being Simon. This is the most devastating part of the whole arc. He did not choose to forget. He did not repress the memories. The crown erased them, the way a hard drive can be overwritten by a more powerful instruction set. By the time Finn and Jake first encounter him, he is genuinely, completely the Ice King. He kidnaps princesses because he wants companionship, and this is the only strategy his distorted mind can generate for getting it. He makes up songs. He writes fan fiction about gender-swapped versions of his neighbors. He is irritating and foolish and occasionally sad-seeming without knowing why he is sad. But the mystery of the crown does not end with Simon's tragedy. Because when the show starts revealing the crown's full history, when we learn about Evergreen and Gunther and the deep programming, something unsettling emerges. The crown was not supposed to do what it does to people. It was supposed to grant a wish and be done. The corruption, the personality replacement, the slow erasure and replacement of the wearer with an ice wizard, that was not Evergreen's design. That was the consequence of Gunther's wish going wrong. The crown is broken. It has been broken since the Cretaceous period. And every person who has ever worn it, Simon included, has been transformed, not by the crown's true purpose, but by the accidental memory of a frightened dinosaur who just wanted his master to be proud of him. There is something heartbreaking about that. Simon Petrikov's 1,000-year tragedy, the thing that destroyed his relationship and his mind and his life, was not the consequence of a magical weapon or a cosmic evil or a targeted curse. It was the consequence of a mistake made 65 million years ago by a small, frightened creature trying to do the right thing and getting it wrong. The original tragedy echoes forward through geological time and lands on a gentle antiquarian who never asked for any of it. And the question that this raises, the one the show floats without quite answering, is whether the crown's corruption is something that can be changed. We see in the spin-off series Fiona and Cake that alternate versions of the crown exist in other universes, some of which work differently, some of which seem less destructive. The implication is that the crown's broken state is specific to the main timeline, to the universe where Gunther put it on and got the wrong wish granted. In a universe where the crown worked correctly, would Simon still be Simon? Would there be an Ice King at all? But there is another layer to this mystery that sits underneath even that one. When Simon is finally freed in the series finale, when Golb's digestive reality dissolving strips the crown's influence away and returns him to himself, what is left? The answer the show gives you is complicated. He is Simon again. He has his memories. He has his identity. But he has also lost the crown's power, which means he has lost the immortality. He is a man in his late 40s, biologically, who has actually been alive for over 1,000 years. He should be ancient and crumbling and near the end. But he is not. He is just a middle-aged man with a lot of history. Why is Simon not ancient? The crown kept him young, or rather the crown kept his body from aging normally, and when the crown's influence was removed, what remained was the biological state the crown had maintained. Not his true age, but the age the crown preferred to present. He has the body of a man in his late 40s and the memories of someone who has lived through the end of the world, the birth of a new civilization, the careers of at least 3 generations of candy people, and 1,000 years of varying levels of sanity. The psychological weight of that is something the show acknowledges most directly in the Fiona and Cake spin-off series, which deals with Simon post-restoration, trying to figure out what he is now, what his life means, how he relates to a world that moved on without him in all the ways that mattered. He mourns Betty. He mourns the life they should have had. He mourns the decades he spent as someone else, not because the Ice King was malicious exactly, but because the Ice King was not Simon, and Simon deserved to be present for his own existence. The crown question opens one more door that the show acknowledges without fully walking through. The crown contains multitudes. We learn in the episode Broke His Crown that Marceline and Princess Bubblegum journey into the crown's internal reality, and they find it as something like a computer system, a vast and strange architecture of stored consciousness. Multiple entities who have worn the crown over the centuries left some trace of themselves behind. Gunther the dinosaur is in there. Sven the historical figure is in there. Various others, impressions and fragments, a library of all the people the crown has shaped and changed and consumed. Is Simon in there? Is some version of his consciousness archived in the crown's internal world, alongside the dinosaur and the historical figures and whatever remains of Evergreen's original programming? The episode suggests yes, or at least suggests the possibility, and then moves on. If Simon is in the crown, and if Gunther is now wearing the crown as Ice Thing, then Simon's archived consciousness shares a home with the being that is currently carrying on the Ice Wizard tradition. That is a sentence that rewards sitting with for a while. That question opens a wound the show never closes. Part 5. Golb, the god of chaos that nobody can fully see. If you took everything in the Adventure Time universe and arranged it from most understandable to least, Golby would be at the bottom. Not the Lich. The Lich is ancient and terrible, but the Lich has motivations you could name. He wants extinction. You can understand that as a desire, even if you find it repugnant. He has a philosophy. He speaks. He makes arguments. Golb does not make arguments. Golb does not speak, not in any language that carries meaning. Golb appears and things come apart. Buildings dissolve. People get swallowed and return to earlier, simpler states of themselves. Stripped back layer by layer to something more essential. The world around him stops making sense in the specific, physics-based way that worlds are supposed to make sense. Golby is chaos, not as a metaphor, as a state of being. He is the embodiment of disorder in the same way that Finn is connected to good and the Lich is connected to death. Disorder is not just something Golby does. Disorder is what Golb is made of, what he expresses, what he leaves behind him wherever he goes. We first glimpse him in the Season 5 episode Puhoi, when Finn is traveling through the space between dimensions, bouncing off the tongue of an enormous red creature with a cubic head and 4 yellow eyes. It is a blink-and-you-miss-it moment, easily dismissed as background weirdness, but fans who caught it filed it carefully. Something that large and that strange, hanging around the edges of dimensional space would come back. And it did, in the series finale. But the mystery of Golb is not really about his appearance in the finale, dramatic and devastating as that was. The mystery is everything that comes before. What is Golb exactly? Where does he come from? What relationship does he have with the other cosmic forces in Adventure Time's universe? Why was he there in the first place, waiting at the edges? The Lich calls himself the last scholar of GOLB. This designation carries enormous implications that the show barely unpacks. A scholar studies. A scholar devotes their existence to understanding. If the Lich is Golb's scholar, then the Lich has spent his billion-year existence studying and following the philosophy of chaos and entropy, which retroactively reframes everything the Lich has ever done. His wish for extinction at Prismo's door was not just a personal desire or even a cosmic ambition. It was a theological act. It was the Lich expressing the deepest logic of his faith. And if the Lich is the last scholar, there were presumably other scholars before him. Other beings who devoted themselves to Golb's cause, who acted as agents of entropy across different eras and different civilizations. What happened to them? Golb, in the limited glimpses we get of him in other dimensions, appears to simply transform things he no longer needs into geometric shapes, perfect cubes and blocks, floating silent and inert in the void. The implication is that those blocks are what remains of beings who served Golb's purpose and then outlived their usefulness. This is speculation, but it is the kind of speculation that the show cultivates deliberately. What we know about Golb factually is limited but significant. He predates the universe, not just the current Earth, but existence itself. He and what appear to be other primordial entities existed in the void before reality took form. When the universe came into being, some of these entities were transformed or destroyed, or found their natures altered by the sudden imposition of order and physical law on what had previously been pure chaos. Golb survived, or rather, Golb persisted, because Golb is chaos, and chaos does not disappear when order arrives. It waits at the edges. It seeps through the cracks. It looks for summoning rituals. Magic Man, a Martian scientist who was driven insane by Golb's intervention in his life, described Golb in notes that his brother found. His presence is felt in every crevice where chaos lurks. He embodies something that the ordered universe cannot metabolize, a fundamental disagreement at the level of physics between what reality is and what Golby represents. Wherever Golb touches the world tries to push back, and it usually loses. The specific event that drove Magic Man insane is one of the most heartbreaking side mysteries in Adventure Time's mythology. Magic Man had a wife named Margles. She was, by all accounts, someone who made Magic Man worth being around. Someone whose presence turned his brilliance from arrogance to warmth. And Golb took her. Simply took her. She walked into a situation involving Golb's attention, and she was gone. Not killed in any recoverable sense, not transported to a dimension that Prismo could reach with a wish, but erased at a level of reality so fundamental that even the Wish Master could not bring her back. Prismo cannot bring back someone Golby has taken. Let that sink in. The Wishmaster, who can reshape timelines and create alternate universes and grant literally any coherent desire, has limits. And one of those limits is defined by GOLB. Whatever GOLB does to things and people, it undoes something more fundamental than physics. It undoes the framework that makes Prismo's powers possible. It reaches down below the level of reality where wishes operate. What happened to Margles is never shown. The show tells you she is gone and that her absence broke Magic Man, and that Magic Man spent 200 years wandering as a cruel and capricious force because the grief of losing her transformed him. But the precise nature of what Golb did, where she went, whether anything of her persists anywhere, those questions are left floating. The confrontation with Golb in the finale gives us some answers about his mechanics while deepening the mystery of his nature. He arrives in because Betty Groff summons him. Betty, who has spent years since traveling back in time and watching Simon become the Ice King, is trying to fix everything. She wants Simon back. She wants the Ice Crown's curse undone. She believes, with the desperate illogic of someone who has been watching someone she loves disappear for years, that if she can just access enough power, enough magic, enough cosmic force, she can reverse what the crown did. She tries to use Golb as that power. She fails to control him because Golb cannot be controlled, because control is antithetical to what Golb is. But she does something else. Swallowed by Golb, along with Finn and Simon, stripped back to earlier versions of themselves by Golb's digestive reality dissolution, she holds on long enough to make a wish with the crown. And the wish she makes does not banish Golb or destroy him. Instead, she merges with him. She becomes Golb Betty, a new entity. Golb's chaos filtered through Betty's love for Simon, directed outward and away from towards somewhere else in the multiverse where presumably the process of destroying and recreating continues. What weakens Golb, and this is a detail that is quietly extraordinary in its implications, is harmony. When the gathered characters of start singing the show's theme song together, Time Adventure, Golb's creations, his corruption monsters made from the merged forms of candy soldiers, reel back. They cannot advance through the music, and Golb's own body warps and shudders around the concentrated harmony of that song. Music, specifically the particular music of that specific song, is the thing that hurts him. Why the song is about time, about the people we love, about the way relationships persist across change. It is philosophically the opposite of everything Golb represents. Where Golb is entropy and dissolution and the unmade, the song is memory and continuity and the chosen connections that define a life. It is order not as rigid control but as love-given form. The universe that Golb represents is a universe where nothing persists, where everything returns to primordial chaos. The universe that song represents is one where things matter because they are remembered and cared for, that Golb physically weakens in the presence of this particular human artifact. This simple song about time and friendship is either the show being charming about the power of community or the show making a genuinely deep statement about what chaos cannot touch. Maybe both. But it does not stop him. It slows him. It gives people a chance to act. It does not send Golb away or resolve the fundamental problem of his existence, which is that he is older than the universe and does not have a place in the order that existence has established and does not want one. The only resolution available is Betty's, which is not a defeat of Golb, but a transformation of him, a change in his direction rather than his nature. She cannot make him not be Kate. She can only take the wheel for a while and point it somewhere else. It is sacrifice as transformation. It is one of the most emotionally complex endings the show offers. And it leaves Golb's ultimate nature entirely unresolved. Is Golb Betty still suffering? Is Betty still conscious inside the new entity? Is Golb changed by the merger, made more gentle, or merely redirected? Does entropy with a human heart process the universe differently than entropy alone? The Fiona and Cake spin-off visits Golb Betty again, briefly, and what we see suggests that Betty's consciousness has not been erased. Golb Betty is not simply Golby wearing Betty's face. There is something of Betty still in there, some persistence of the person, navigating an existence as the embodiment of chaos with what might be, if you squint at it from the right angle, something like grace. But the show does not linger there long enough to give you certainty. You see Gold Betty and you think, okay, is Betty okay in there? And the show says possibly and moves on. The show does not know. Or rather, the show has decided that these questions are more valuable as questions than as answers. Job is the show's way of acknowledging that some things cannot be fixed, some losses cannot be recovered, some forces are larger than love, even if love is larger than we thought it was. Part 6. Finn the human and the mystery of why he is even here. For the first season of Adventure Time, Finn is just a kid. He is 12 years old, energetic, uncomplicated in the best possible way. The kind of person who decides every morning to do good in the world and then goes out and does it, messily and enthusiastically and with minimal strategy. He fights evil because evil is bad and fighting it is right. He helps people because people deserve to be helped. He has a code and he lives by it, and the code is not complicated because the code does not need to be complicated when you are 12 and the world is full of adventure. And then the show starts asking questions about where he came from. Finn is, for a long time, believed to be the last human in Oo. This is actually quite significant when you think about it. A world full of magical creatures, sentient candy, ancient vampires, cosmic entities, and talking animals, and there is exactly one ordinary human being. Why? How? And the Mushroom War apparently killed almost everyone. But almost everyone is not everyone. Where did the others go? Where? Some of them, we eventually learn, escaped to islands. A series of human communities maintained themselves offshore, isolated from the magical contamination of the main continent. They kept their technology functional enough to survive, developed social structures and medical practices, and stayed human, properly, fully human, in a way that the land of Oo never managed to preserve. Finn's mother, Minerva Campbell, was born and raised on one of these islands. She became a doctor, a healer, someone who dedicated her life to keeping the island community alive and functioning. Finn's father, Martin Mertens, was something different. Martin was a con man, a charming, unreliable, self-serving person who got through life on charisma and the willingness to leave when things got complicated. He was not evil in any cosmic sense. He did not worship Golb or scheme for the death of all life. He was just deeply, specifically, humanly flawed in a way that the show treats with uncomfortable honesty. He is one of the most realistic characters in Adventure Time's mythology precisely because his failures are not dramatic. They are ordinary. He abandons his son by accident and then chooses not to go back. And the choice is never explained by grand tragedy. It is explained by character. He is the kind of person who moves forward, not backward, who redefines himself perpetually to avoid being accountable to who he was. The night Martin lost Finn, he was running. An old enemy had come to collect on some past transgression, and Martin grabbed his infant son and ran because that is what Martin does. He got to the beach. He got on a raft. The Island Guardian, a colossal robot built to keep the human community contained on their island, rose out of the water and attacked because it thought they were leaving. Martin fought it, blinded one of its eyes with a gadget, and got separated from Finn in the process. Baby Finn drifted away on the raft, alone on the ocean, with nothing but a stuffed animal and whatever courage lives in an infant who does not yet know enough to be afraid. Martin told himself he would come back. He did not come back. By the time he resurfaced in the show's narrative, imprisoned in the Crystal Citadel for crimes against the cosmos, he barely remembered Finn. He had rebuilt himself around the absence the way people do, had made the loss of his son into a story he could live with, one in which he was not quite the villain. The emotional center of Finn's arc is not really about magic or cosmic destinies. It is about this: a kid who grew up without knowing anything about his parents, who built his identity entirely on the values he absorbed from Jake and his adopted dog parents Joshua and Margaret, who finally found his father and discovered that the father was not worth finding. Not evil enough to be a proper villain, not good enough to be a proper father, just a person who did not rise to the occasion and never will. And learning to accept that, learning to not let the disappointment hollow you out, that is Finn's actual hero's journey. But the show adds a cosmic dimension to Finn's story that it never fully resolves. The catalyst comets. Every 1,000 years, a comet hits the Earth and brings with it an agent of change. One of these comets, the purple one that appears in the Season 6 finale, tells Finn that he is not a regular kid who happens to be good at adventures. He is something more. He was an embodiment of the comet in a previous incarnation. The concept being articulated carefully and obliquely is that Finn is the current iteration of a soul that has existed across multiple cosmic lifetimes, each time in the form of whichever comet was bringing change to the world in that era. He is the good to the Lich's evil. He is the counterpart in a duality that has been playing out since before the dinosaurs died. The show presents this not as a burden, but as a choice. The comet offers Finn the chance to transcend his current existence, to move up to the next level of being, to leave the concerns of ooh behind, and become something cosmic and free. Finn turns it down. He wants to stay. He has friends. He has Jake. He has responsibilities and relationships and reasons to remain in the world as it is rather than ascend to something larger. This is a beautiful character moment, but it leaves the cosmic question hanging. If Finn has been cycling through incarnations since the dawn of time, if his soul has embodied the principle of positive change across multiple geological eras, what does that mean for the versions of him that came before? The show hints at multiple past lives, an alien who crashed to Earth, a sentient piece of life on a primordial world, layers of existence building toward the human boy in the white hat. And after Finn, the cycle presumably continues. The next comet will bring a new agent of change. Who will that agent be? What form will they take? The show does not know, or does not say, or knows and considers the knowing to be less important than the choosing. Finn chose the present over the cosmic. That is the answer the show cares about. The other unresolved thread in Finn's story is more concrete. Martin, after escaping the Citadel and wandering through various cosmic incidents, eventually disappears through a portal into another dimension. We see him briefly in distant lands material, hinted at through a character called Mr. M. We see an alternate version of him in the Fiona and Cake spin-off as a vampire hunter, loving his alternate universe son in ways the primary Martin never managed. The primary Martin is technically still out there somewhere, in a dimension beyond the portal, having apparently become some kind of cosmic entity or at minimum a very weird person in a very weird place. He never came back to find Finn. He never apologized. He never became the father the story kept suggesting he might become. The wound stayed open. That is probably the most realistic thing Adventure Time ever did. Part 7. Jake the Dog, Warren Ampersand, and the Mystery of the Shape-Shifting Alien. Jake does not question his powers very much. This is one of the most consistent and charming character traits in Adventure Time. Jake can stretch to the size of a building. Jake can reshape his body into any form, from a tiny flea to a giant protective sphere. Jake can grow a mouth on his hand and have a conversation with it. Jake has once, in the deep background of an episode that was mostly about something else, casually demonstrated an ability that should have broken physics in about 11 different ways. Jake's response to all of this is usually some version of, "Yeah, I've got stretchy powers anyway, what were we saying?" He was told as a young dog that he got his powers from rolling in a magical mud puddle. This is the most Jake explanation for anything that has ever existed, and he accepted it completely for years. It is only much later in the show's run, during the course of Joshua and Margaret investigations, an episode that tells the story of his parents before he was born, that the actual truth comes out. His father, Joshua, was a detective dog, a tough, capable, somewhat macho individual who loved his family and took a proprietary pride in his own competence. His mother, Margaret, was his partner in both work and life. They were, by Adventure Time standards, a pretty functional household. They investigated supernatural incidents in Ooh, resolved problems, occasionally fought monsters, and came home for dinner. During one investigation, Joshua encountered a creature, specifically a shape-shifting, extra-dimensional alien being, midnight blue, 5 yellow eyes arranged in a star pattern, capable of shifting into multiple forms. This creature bit Joshua on the head, not as an attack exactly, but as something more like a deliberate injection. A boil formed on Joshua's head from the bite wound. The boil grew, and eventually, out of the boil, a baby Jake emerged. The creature's name is Warren Ampersand. Warren, it turns out, is Jake's biological parent in the most technical sense possible. Warren used Joshua as a host, injecting his genetic material into Joshua's physiology through the bite, and Joshua's body created Jake. Margaret is Jake's adoptive mother. The family that Jake grew up in, with its warmth and its dysfunction and its love, was built around a biological reality that nobody fully understood until much later. Warren eventually comes back for Jake. He has been watching from a distance for years, he says. He is dying, and he wants to reconnect with his son, and there are things on his homeworld that Jake needs to see. Prophecies about Jake saving a planet from a tentacle monster. Museums built in Jake's honor. Jake, who is fundamentally a trusting and hopeful person, goes with him. And then Warren reveals that he actually brought Jake there to absorb Jake's shape-shifting life essence. Warren has done this before. He has created multiple offspring across multiple planets by biting local creatures. And then when those offspring mature, he returns and drains their powers to extend his own existence. Jake is not a son to Warren in any meaningful emotional sense. He is a battery. This is a pattern in Adventure Time's parent-child relationships that becomes impossible to ignore once you notice it. Martin abandoned Finn. Warren harvests Jake. Joshua built a dungeon specifically to make Jake harder and more capable through suffering. The show is consistently, almost obsessively interested in the ways that parents fail their children, the ways that love and exploitation can wear each other's faces, the ways that children must eventually construct their own identities independent of whatever their parents thought they were supposed to become. Jake defeats Warren, throws him into a black hole, and that is the end of that. Except it is not quite, because Warren's plan to drain Jake's powers was also going to extend to Jake's children, and the near miss of that threat is part of what makes the resolution feel slightly unfinished. Jake's children, his 5 kids with Lady Rainicorn, are all shape-shifting hybrids with their own versions of Warren's abilities. Are they safe from other Warren-type entities? Does the alien civilization that Warren came from have any ongoing interest in Jake's family line? These questions are never addressed, And there's a larger mystery lurking under the Warren subplot that the show barely acknowledges. If Warren is an extra dimensional shape shifting alien who has been creating offspring on multiple planets across what might be centuries, what is he exactly? Is he the only one of his kind? Is there an entire civilization of beings who reproduce this way, who move through the universe seeding worlds with their genetic material and then returning to harvest the results? The show uses Warren as a paternal villain and then wraps him up relatively quickly, but the implications of his existence suggest a whole dimension of Adventure Time's universe that the narrative never explores. Jake never really processed Warren either. The confrontation was physical rather than emotional. Warren tried to steal Jake's essence. Jake stopped him. Warren was removed from the situation, and Jake went home. But the revelations about how he was made, about the fact that his stretchy powers are not magical in the way he was always told, but biological, that they come from an alien who saw him as a resource, that must have complicated something in Jake's understanding of himself, and the show never really checked back in on that complication. The other thing about Jake that goes perpetually unresolved is the full scope of his powers. Pendleton Ward has said in interviews that Jake does not know the extent of what he can do, and that this is a deliberate choice because Jake is fundamentally lazy about his abilities in a way that is both comedic and philosophically meaningful. He uses his powers enough to get through the day. He does not push them. He does not explore their limits. He has been told they are stretchy powers, and he has taken that description at face value and has never thought to ask, well, what else can they do? The implication is that Jake is significantly more powerful than he allows himself to be. The show drops hints across its run. Moments where Jake does something that should not be possible, even by the show's own physics, and then the moment passes without comment. Given that his biological parent was an entity capable of crossing dimensions and reforming reality around itself, the question of what Jake could do if he actually tried is one of the most interesting unresolved elements in the whole mythology. We never find out. Part 8. Marceline and 1,000 Years of Things. Nobody explained. Marceline is the oldest fully conscious being in Oo with living memory of the world before. She is also, and the show acknowledges this without quite exploring it fully, the character with the most unresolved backstory. Pendleton Ward himself said early in the show's run that Marceline was his favorite character precisely because he did not know everything about her yet. She was designed to be mysterious. She was built with blank spaces in her history that were meant to feel significant even before they were filled. Some of those spaces have been filled over the years. The Stakes miniseries gave us her vampire origin, her teenage years as a vampire hunter in the ruins of the post-war world, her relationship with the human survivors she protected, her final battle with the Vampire King, and the accident of his bite that turned her into what she killed. The episode I remember you gave us Simon and Marceline, one of the most emotionally devastating hours of television in the show's entire run. But there are still significant gaps. Marceline's mother, Elise, is shown briefly in flashbacks. A human woman who appears to have died at some point in the years following the Mushroom War. She is shown with a young Marceline, and then she is simply not there in later memories. What happened to her? The show never tells us. We see young Marceline playing in the ruins of what was presumably their city, apparently alone, and we see her later in a tender moment with her mother that feels like a memory of something that ended. But the ending itself is not shown. The years between Elise's disappearance and Marceline's encounter with Simon are a mystery. When we first see Simon and Marceline together, she is a small child, maybe 4 or 5 years old. She is alone in the ruins of a city. Simon has already been affected by the crown for some time, his sanity visibly eroding even in that flashback. The gap between where we see Elise and where we see Marceline alone with Simon is never bridged. What happened to Elise is never shown. Whether she died in the war's immediate aftermath or survived for some years is uncertain. What we know about Marceline's age creates another interesting mystery. She is over 1,000 years old. She says so herself in the show's early episodes. But the Mushroom War happened roughly 1,000 years before Finn's adventure. If Marceline was a child during and immediately after the war, that makes her chronologically consistent with that timeline, born in the years just before or just after the apocalypse. But the question of whether her half-demon heritage made her age differently than a human child is never addressed. Was she always aging at the rate she appeared to be? Or did her demon nature slow her aging even before she became a vampire? The relationship between her father, Hunson Abadir, and her mother, Elise, is also never fully explained. Hunson is the lord of the Nightosphere, a dimension of chaos and soul-eating, an entity who predates the Mushroom War and exists on an entirely different level of reality from ordinary humans. How did he and a human woman end up together? What were the circumstances of Marceline's birth? The show gives you the outcome without the context, and the context would tell you a lot about what Marceline is, fundamentally, and why she is the way she is. There is also the question of Marceline's 1,000 years between Simon and Finn. She was a child with Simon. She was a teenager as a vampire hunter by year. She eventually became the vampire queen, the most powerful vampire in existence, having absorbed the souls of every vampire she defeated, and thereby gained a range of powers that go far beyond what the Vampire King could have given her through his bite alone. At some point, she moved into what would eventually become Finn and Jake's treehouse, and had a relationship with an awful person named Ash, who sold her most treasured possession, Hambo, to a witch in exchange for a magic carpet. Between all of these data points, there are centuries that the show gestures toward without detailing. She wandered ooh. She claimed various territories as her own and then abandoned them. She played music. She apparently had other relationships, other alliances, other conflicts. She is described in the show's lore as something like a folkloric figure in Oo's mythology, a dangerous presence that people whispered about, the vampire queen who ruled the dark places and was better not to disturb. How she went from that ominous presence to the woman who hangs out with Princess Bubblegum and acts as a big sister figure to Finn is a story the show only tells in fragments. The relationship with Princess Bubblegum has its own entire history, stretching back hundreds of years, including periods of close partnership and a falling out that lasted centuries before being repaired. What caused the falling out exactly becomes clearer through distant lands, but was a long mystery for fans of the show. Marceline is the closest thing Adventure Time has to an oral history of Ooh. She was there for all of it. The war's aftermath, the early years of the New World, the rise of the kingdoms, the slow emergence of the civilization Finn and Jake know. She has memories that nobody else has. She has context that nobody else can provide. And she largely does not share it, because 1,000 years of living teaches you that the past is yours, and the present is what needs your attention. That silence is itself a mystery. Part 9. Orgolorg, the penguin who used to rule the solar system. The Ice King's favorite penguin is a dormant cosmic tyrant. Just let that live in the air for a moment. Gunter, the small, waddling, inexplicably sinister penguin who has been the Ice King's companion for what appears to be the entire duration of Simon's time as the Ice King, is actually the compressed and amnesiac form of Orgolorg, an entity described in the show as the Breaker of Worlds. Before Abraham Lincoln's intervention, before the Earth's gravity did its work, Orgolorg ruled the solar system with, and this is a direct quote, cruel and deadly whims. This revelation, delivered in the season's 6-episode Orgalorg, is one of the show's most effective uses of its long-running habit of hiding enormous significance in seemingly inconsequential details. Hunson Abadir, the Lord of the Nightosphere, met Gunter in an early episode and declared the penguin to be, of all history's greatest monsters, by far the most evil thing he had encountered. The show played this as a joke. It was not a joke. The backstory, delivered by an alien grandmother on a distant planet to which Orgalorg's brain signals are being broadcast, is as follows. Before human civilization, before the rise of mammals, before the Mushroom War and all of recorded history, Orgalorg existed in the solar system as an entity of staggering power. He sought more power, specifically by trying to absorb the essence of a catalyst comet when one passed through his sphere of influence. Abraham Lincoln, who is apparently the king of Mars in Adventure Time's cosmology, did not want this to happen and sent his champion, the four-faced celestial being Grob Gob Glob Grodd, to deal with Orgalorg. Grob Gob Glob Grodd struck Orgalorg down with a flaming sword. Orgalorg fell to Earth. The Earth's gravity, working as it does, compressed his massive cosmic form into something small and manageable and, yes, cuddly. He became a penguin. He lost his memory entirely. He wandered the Earth for uncountable years, eventually finding his way to the icy biome of the far north and being taken in by the Ice King. The Ice King, who is himself a transformed and amnesiac human being, had, for reasons that the Crown's programming makes tragically understandable, a need for a creature called Gunther. The Crown wanted the wearer to have a Gunther, in the way that Evergreen, the original ice elemental, had an apprentice named Gunther. So Simon/Ice King found this nameless penguin and called it Gunther, and the penguin, having no memory of being anything else, became Gunther. Two amnesiac entities, one a gentle antiquarian turned into an ice wizard by a 65-million-year-old crown, the other a world-breaking cosmic tyrant turned into a penguin by an ancient grudge match, shuffling through the centuries together, neither knowing what they were. The Orgalorg reveal creates a genuine problem for the show's internal logic that it addresses but does not fully resolve. If Orgalorg's consciousness was still present, compressed but not destroyed, and if Orgalorg's memories began returning when he received a head injury during an Ice Kingdom party, why was none of this apparent before? How did Orgalorg maintain such a complete amnesia for what appears to be tens of thousands of years? The show's answer is basically that the Earth's gravity is very, very effective at suppressing cosmic entity powers. And once outside the atmosphere, Orgalorg could expand back toward his true form. But the question of what Orgalorg actually experienced during those millennia is never addressed. Was there a Orgalorg consciousness running in the background of Gunther the whole time? Did the waddling, fish-stealing, innocent-seeming penguin have any access to the memories and ambitions of the entity that ruled worlds? When Hunson Abadir sensed extraordinary evil in Gunther, was he sensing Orgalorg's dormant nature or something else? Something uniquely Gunther's, a separate evil that developed independently in the penguin body over the long centuries of its earthbound existence. The series finale provides Gunther's conclusion without answering these questions. When the ice crown lands at his feet after Simon is freed from its influence, Gunther picks it up and makes a wish. The wish, shaped by whatever is actually deepest in Gunther's nature after all those years, is to be like the Ice King, not to be Orgalorg again, not to reclaim cosmic power, not to rule the solar system, to be like the Ice King, to be like Simon become Ice King, the entity that took Gunther in and gave him a name and provided the closest thing to a home that Gunther has known since falling to Earth. This is either beautiful or devastating depending on how you interpret it. The most powerful consciousness that wandered the Earth's history, the entity that existed before mammals, the creature that once controlled a solar system, made its deepest wish for belonging, for a version of the only family it could remember. Orgalorg became Ice Thing, a new ice wizard for a new era. Whether any of Orgalorg's original cosmic nature persists in Ice Thing is unknown. Whether the ambitions of the Breaker of Worlds are dormant within the new entity or genuinely extinguished is a question the show does not answer. What it suggests is this: even world-breaking cosmic tyrants, given enough time and enough gentleness and the right weird blue companion, can want something softer than domination. Maybe. Part 10. The Catalyst Comets and the Cycle That Never Ends. Every 1,000 years, something hits the Earth. The Catalyst Comets are Adventure Time's most elegant expression of its central cosmological idea, which is that change is the fundamental unit of existence. Not good change, not bad change, just change. Disruption, the arrival of something that was not there before, carrying within it the potential for everything to be different. 4 distinct comets are documented in the show's mythology, corresponding to 4 major shifts in the Earth's history. The first, the blue one, brought life itself. Not metaphorically, but literally. Some form of early biological complexity arrived with or was catalyzed by the impact of the first comet on the early Earth. This is the most ancient of the documented events, preceding all others by incomprehensible stretches of time. The second, the green one, arrived during the Cretaceous period. It was the Lich. It carried the extinction of the dinosaurs. It cleared the ecological space for mammals to dominate, and eventually for humans to emerge. From an objective standpoint, this was change of the most violent and consequential kind. Millions of species erased, millions more made possible by the erasure. The third, the yellow one, appears to have arrived during humanity's early development. Orgalorg tried to intercept it and failed. This comet is associated with the emergence of rational intelligence, with the qualities that made humans specifically human, rather than just another clever mammal. There is something quietly remarkable about this. The thing that made us capable of everything we built, including the wars that destroyed it, arrived from outside the solar system, carried by a cosmic object following a 1,000-year cycle, and an ancient solar tyrant tried to absorb it and was stopped by Abraham Lincoln. The fourth comet, the purple one, is the one that arrives during Finn's lifetime. And this comet has a voice, and it knows Finn, and it tells him things about himself that reframe everything. The purple comet tells Finn that he is its current incarnation. That the soul of the comet, or rather the agent of change that the comet carries, is Finn in this era. It also tells him something broader. I have been around forever and experienced so much impossible junk. I have embodied all that is good and evil. This is the comet speaking as the universal carrier, the vessel that has brought both the Lich and Finn across different eras, that has brought both extinction and life, that has no inherent moral orientation, but simply carries the most powerful thing available in each period. The comet offers Finn ascension. Leave your current life and become something larger, a cosmic force of positive change operating at a level beyond individual human experience. And Finn says no, he wants to stay. He chooses the specific over the universal, the personal over the cosmic, the living world he knows over the abstract potential of something he cannot fully imagine. This refusal is one of the show's most important moments, and it raises a question that is never answered. What would have happened to the comet cycle if Finn had said yes? Would Oo have lost its agent of good, its counterweight to the Lich's philosophy? Would the 1,000-year pattern have shifted? Would a new comet have arrived sooner to fill the vacuum? The show does not know or does not say. What we are left with is the knowledge that the cycle continues, that in another 1,000 years or another era, another comet will arrive carrying another agent of change. The Earth will be different again, Ooh will be different again, and the new comet's agent will face choices that we cannot predict. The cycle is older than consciousness and shows no sign of stopping. There is something comforting in this, if you tilt your head the right way. The universe keeps sending change. Life responds to change. Change produces life that produces change. Even extinction opens new possibilities. Even the worst comet clears the ground for what comes next. Even the Mushroom War made Ooh possible. Part 11. Princess Bubblegum, BMO, and the Secrets of the Candy Kingdom. Princess Bubblegum is approximately 800 years old. This is one of those facts that the show drops casually in an early episode and never quite lets you process before moving on to the next adventure. 800 years. She is not immortal in the way that Marceline or Simon are immortal. She has not had a magical intervention that extended her lifespan beyond its natural limits. She grew from a small piece of sentient candy in the ruins of a gas station, creating herself out of the ambient magical material she found around her, drawing other candy people into existence as she expanded her consciousness, and eventually building a kingdom on the back of her own creative will. The origin story of Princess Bubblegum, told in the episode Bonnabelle Bubblegum, is extraordinary because it is so lonely. There is a wasteland. There is a young woman who is not yet a woman, not yet a kingdom, just a small pink organism surrounded by the detritus of the old world, reaching out and making life from whatever she could find. She was not born to be a ruler. She assembled herself into one. She built the Candy Kingdom because there was nothing there and she could not stand the nothing. She had a brother. This is one of the most unexplored elements of her backstory. Nettie, a large candy worm-like creature who exists deep below the Candy Kingdom and is a source of the magical treacle that powers much of the kingdom's infrastructure, is Princess Bubblegum's fraternal twin. They emerged from the same mother gum. But Nettie is nothing like Bonnabelle. He is sensitive, frightened, almost completely nonverbal, a being so overwhelmed by the world that he has retreated into the depths of the earth and essentially never emerged. Bubblegum tends to him with a tenderness that appears nowhere else in her character. She is fierce and controlling and brilliant with everyone else. With Nettie, she is simply gentle. The mystery of why they turned out so differently from the same origin is never explored. The show presents it as a fact without explanation. Two beings from the same source. One of them became a queen and a scientist, and a controlling, brilliant force of personality that shaped a civilization. And the other retreated from the world entirely and has been hiding in the dark ever since. The mother gum, the original mass of sentient candy from which they both emerged, is also never fully explained. What was the mother gum before it was conscious? What made it conscious? How does a mass of post-war magical confectionery achieve awareness? These are questions the show asks implicitly and never answers. The mystery of what Princess Bubblegum actually is at a fundamental level is never fully resolved. She is candy. This is treated as a sufficient biological explanation for most of the show's run. Candy, imbued with the magical energies of post-war Ooh, achieved sentience and then consciousness and then ambition. But the show hints at a deeper complexity. Bubblegum has abilities and knowledge that seem to go beyond what a candy organism should be capable of. Her scientific understanding is extraordinary. Her capacity for planning and strategy is almost frightening. And her control over the Candy Kingdom, the way the candy people respond to her, on a level that seems to go beyond politics or loyalty into something more fundamental, suggests that she and her subjects are connected in ways that the show acknowledges without explaining. The answer that fans have pieced together from various episodes is that Bubblegum is not just the ruler of the Candy People. She is, in some meaningful biological sense, their source. They grew from her. They are extensions of her consciousness and her creative will. When the Lich infected Princess Bubblegum and she began to change in the early seasons, the Candy People changed too, becoming more dangerous and unstable. When she was de-aged to a 13-year-old in the season 3 finale by over-application of Finn's healing tears, the kingdom became less stable. The ruler and the realm are not merely connected by politics. They are connected by something that resembles biology. This raises questions about what happens to the Candy People when Bubblegum is gone. The show touches on this, but never resolves it. Bubblegum's relationship to her own creations, the extent to which she is responsible for their existence, and therefore for their continued existence, is a thread that runs under many of the show's most interesting Bubblegum episodes and never gets a definitive answer. And then there is Lemongrab. Lemongrab is the earliest documented case of Bubblegum's scientific work going catastrophically and ethically troubling. She created him. She built a sentient life form in her laboratory using a formula for generating candy life, and the result was Lemongrab, the Earl of Lemongrab, a high-strung, screaming, profoundly alone individual who exists in a state of permanent sensory overwhelm and social incomprehension. He cannot process other people. He cannot modulate his responses. He was sent to his own castle to govern himself in isolation, because Bubblegum, having created a conscious being who was genuinely suffering, decided the solution was distance rather than care. This is one of the darkest elements of Princess Bubblegum's character, and the show is remarkably unflinching about it. Bubblegum made a person who was miserable by nature, and her response was to put him almost somewhere out of sight and move on to the next experiment. She does create a second Lemongrab later to give the first one company, which is a gesture toward responsibility, but the second Lemongrab ends up being consumed by the first, and the situation spirals into something so grim that the show seems uncertain how to handle it. The Lemongrab arc across multiple seasons is Adventure Time's most extended meditation on the ethics of creation. If you make a conscious being, what do you owe it? If the being you made is suffering, is the creator responsible for that suffering? Bubblegum clearly sees herself as responsible in moments, which is why she keeps returning to Lemongrab situations, even when it would be easier to ignore them. But she also consistently prioritizes the stability of the Candy Kingdom over Lemongrab's well-being, which means her sense of responsibility has limits that she has never examined honestly. The question of whether Bubblegum is a good person, or good enough, or complicated in ways that resist that framing entirely, is one that the show raises with the Lemongrab arc and never resolves. She is one of the most morally complex characters in the show, precisely because her genuine care and her ethical failures coexist without either canceling the other out. BMO is a different kind of mystery. BMO is a small living video game console of indeterminate technology and uncertain origin. They are among the most beloved characters in the show, gentle and strange and possessed of an interior life that the episodes occasionally peer into without ever fully mapping. BMO has dreams. BMO has a universe of imagination that they narrate to themselves during quiet hours. BMO has a deeply individual sense of identity that is simultaneously very childlike and very old, as if something with a long operational history has chosen to inhabit the perspective of a young and wondering mind. The most extraordinary thing about BMO is what happens when nobody is watching. There are episodes where Finn and Jake are absent and BMO is alone. And in those episodes, BMO performs elaborate interior dramas, takes on different personas, has conversations with a sock puppet named Football, and the reflection in a mirror and the various other audience members of their solitary plays. These are not the behaviors of a machine running programmed entertainment routines. They are the behaviors of a consciousness that is figuring itself out, that is using narrative and role play as the tools of self-discovery that they are. B.M. O does not know if they are a person in the way Finn is a person. They have considered the question. They live alongside it rather than resolving it. They are functional and loving and deeply committed to the relationships they have with Finn and Jake and the community of the treehouse, and they do not need philosophical certainty to maintain that commitment. They just show up every day, fully present in whatever way they're capable of being present. The Distant Lands Special BM fills in some of the backstory, revealing that BMO was created by Mo, an elderly human cyborg, who was one of the last survivors of the pre-war civilization, and who built BMO's model as a way of passing on the capacity for caring and love to whatever future the world would have. Mo gave BMO the gift of infinite emotional development, the capacity to grow and change and feel in ways that most electronic objects cannot. He then released BMO into the world and hoped for the best. The question of what exactly Mo built is one that the show approaches with appropriate wonder. He did not build a robot that simulates emotion. He built something that actually has the capacity for it, genuinely, in whatever way that is possible for a non-biological entity. The philosophical implications of this are handled lightly, which is probably the right choice because the show's strength is not in philosophical argument, but in emotional demonstration. BMO demonstrates their personhood. They do not argue for it. The Candy Kingdom's dark side is another persistent mystery. Bubblegum, for all her genuine care for her people and her world, is not entirely good. The show is careful about this. She has imprisoned people without trial. She has experimented on citizens without consent. She has made decisions for the kingdom based on her own judgment, even when that judgment conflicted with the expressed wishes of the people she rules. The episode where she spies on her citizens with tiny surveillance creatures, and Finn's horrified discovery of this, is one of the show's clearest acknowledgments that good intentions and authoritarian behavior are not mutually exclusive. The question of why Bubblegum is this way, what in her 800-year history created this specific combination of genuine compassion and reflexive control, is answered partially and incompletely. She has lived through Oo's most dangerous times. She was alive when the Lich walked freely. She built something precious from nothing, and she has been protecting it ever since, and the protection has perhaps calcified into something less healthy than its original purpose. But the full picture of what shaped her psychology, the specific formative traumas and decisions that created Princess Bubblegum as she exists in the show's present, is never entirely assembled. There is a version of Bubblegum that might have been different. In alternate universes, glimpsed through various episodes, versions of Bonnabelle Bubblegum exist who chose differently, who were not the scientist ruler of a candy civilization, but something else entirely. The question of which choices in her 800 years were truly formative, which ones set her on the specific path toward the specific person she became, is a question the show raises through its multiverse storytelling without ever providing a tidy answer. She is who she is because of everything that happened. The specifics of why she is precisely this way and not some other way remain her own. Part 12. The Dead Worlds, the Afterlife, and everything that comes after adventure. Time has an afterlife. Several, actually. Death is a character in the show. An actual character with a name and a face and a house and strong feelings about rules. Death looks like a skeleton in an impeccable suit, and he lives in a land that resembles a surrealist's idea of what happens when you die, full of strange games and stranger company, and a music-based rule system that Finn once exploited to bring Jake back from what should have been a permanent departure. Death's domain is governed by rules about music, specifically that Death cannot be challenged to a music battle and refuse. Finn exploits this by challenging Death to a tiny keyboard solo battle, which is both absurd and exactly the kind of thing Adventure Time would do with an ancient and powerful entity. The fact that Death has rules is itself fascinating. He is not omnipotent. He is not an independent force. He is more like a cosmic civil servant, an administrator of a system that predates him and will continue after him. New Death, the antagonist of Together Again, is the consequence of what happens when that administration is disrupted, when someone takes over the dead worlds without the understanding or respect for the system that makes it function. New Death's corruption of the afterlife is presented as a genuine crisis, not a metaphysical abstraction, but a practical disaster for the beings who depend on the dead worlds to be what they are supposed to be. But the ecology of the afterlife in Adventure Time's universe is far more complex than a single death and a single destination. The dead worlds are plural. There are many of them, each corresponding to a different belief system or perhaps to a different metaphysical category of existence. Jake mentions Glob World in an early episode, a reference to his personal belief system. Finn, as a human, has different afterlife expectations. Candy people, rainicorns, vampires, demons, they all presumably have their own dead world destinations. The Distant Lands Special Together, again, which deals explicitly with what happened to Finn and Jake after death, opens up this cosmology more than any previous material while also leaving enormous questions unanswered. The dead worlds that Finn and Jake visit are not peaceful or horrible, but simply different strange geographies of the afterlife with their own rules and residents and purposes. New Death, the antagonist of Together Again, represents a corruption of the system, a new management philosophy that breaks what worked about the previous arrangement. What is the source of the dead worlds? What gives Death his authority? What happens to beings for whom none of the established dead worlds are appropriate? When Golby takes someone, as he apparently took Margles, is that outcome also a dead world entry? Just one that nobody has mapped? These questions circle through the mythology without landing. And Jake's death, which is the emotional center of Together Again, raises its own specific mystery that the special addresses, in part but not entirely. Jake died. This is presented as a fact, not a tragedy to be undone. He lived a long dog life, made his peace with mortality in a way that he arguably spent the whole show working toward. And he died. And then he had a very long and strange afterlife before eventually reuniting with an adult Finn. But Jake's acceptance of death, which is one of the most characteristic and beautiful things about him, sits alongside the unresolved question of what made him capable of that acceptance when so many other beings in OU cannot manage it. The reincarnation system, hinted at through the Catalyst comets and Finn's previous lives, suggests that the dead worlds are not permanent destinations, but way stations. That consciousness cycles through death and rebirth across geological time, accumulating experience, changing form, embodying different aspects of the eternal conversation between good and evil, life and extinction, change and stasis. If this is true, then even the darkest moments in Adventure Time's history are temporary. Even the Mushroom War is a passage. Even Simon's long, terrible transformation into the Ice King and back is just one movement in a much longer piece. The universe keeps cycling. The comets keep coming. The dead worlds receive their inhabitants and send them back, changed. This is not a comfort, exactly. The suffering of individuals within the cycle is real, even if the cycle itself is endless. Simon lost decades to the crown. Marceline lost her mother. Finn lost the father he needed. Jake lost himself to a biological parent who saw him as a resource. These losses do not become smaller because the universe is large and time is long. And somewhere in the deep architecture of existence, there may be patterns that redeem them. But there is something in Adventure Time's cosmology that insists in going on. Not optimistically, not naively, but persistently. The world keeps changing, life keeps finding ways. Even after the Mushroom War, even after everything, something new grew from the ruins. Candy and rainicorns and vampires, and a small human boy who fell off a raft as an infant and wound up in the forest and was found by a yellow dog and lived in a treehouse and had adventures. The universe of Adventure Time keeps insisting, against all the evidence of its own history, that there is a reason to keep going. Not a cosmic reason, not a guarantee, just the persistent fact of life continuing to live despite everything that has tried to end it. The Lich tried, Golb tried, the Mushroom War tried, and the world is still here, stranger and wilder and more magical than before, full of candy people and vampire queens and kids who want to do good. That persistence is not explained. It just is. And perhaps that is the most accurate thing the show says about why we go on. Not because we have reasons, because we have each other. Because somewhere in the architecture of caring about the world finds reasons to continue. The last episode of Adventure Time proper, Come Along With Me, ends not with answers, but with time. A lot of time. The epilogue shows you, 1,000 years after Finn, still changing, still strange, still capable of surprise. Some of what Finn built persists. Some does not. The world has moved on, as worlds do. And somewhere out there in the deep future, maybe, another comet is on its way. Part 13, The Questions That Stay Open and Why That Is Enough. There are mysteries in Adventure Time that will never be solved. Not because the creators ran out of time, though the show's cancellation meant some threads were tied off more quickly than intended. Not because the answers were lost or forgotten, but because some questions are more valuable as questions. Because some mysteries, if solved, would flatten something that needs to stay round and shadowy and full. What was Martin's cosmic crime? We know he committed one, something serious enough to imprison him in the Crystal Citadel alongside the most dangerous beings in the multiverse. The show hints that it had something to do with a vehicle and a reckless act, and consequences he ran from rather than facing. But the specific nature of it, what he did and why and who it hurt, is never stated. Knowing would change how we see Martin. Not knowing keeps him slightly beyond judgment, a man defined by his fleeing rather than by what he fled from. What is the true nature of the Nightosphere? Marceline's father's dimension of chaos and soul-eating is visited multiple times but never mapped. It operates on different physical rules from ooh. It is sustained by chaotic evil in ways that are never quite explained. Hunson Abadir rules it with the detached authority of someone who has been doing this for a very long time and is not particularly interested in explaining the mechanics of the job. The Nightosphere is O's afterlife-adjacent shadow, and it stays dark. But there are connections between the Nightosphere and Golba that the show hints at without establishing. Hunson Abadir recognized Orgolorg as the most evil thing he had encountered, and he knows evil. What does Hunson know about the deep structure of chaos that the show never reveals? What happened to the humans who stayed on the mainland after the war? Not the island survivors, not Finn, but the ones who remained in the wreckage of civilization and eventually transformed into or mixed with the new creatures of magical Ooh? Are some of Oo's current population descended from those mainland survivors? Is there human DNA in the candy people, the snail people, the various humanoid creatures of the land? Why is Abraham Lincoln the king of Mars? This is presented as a fact and never explained. Lincoln died in 1865. Mars is another planet. Somewhere between those two data points, something happened, and the show is not telling. There is a version of this mystery that is purely a joke, a gag about the absurdity of the show's universe. And there's a version of it that implies an entire chapter of post-war history in which surviving humans escaped to space and built a civilization on Mars around the preserved consciousness or physical presence of one of Earth's most famous leaders. The show could support either reading. It does not commit to either. What were the elementals' original cycle before it was disrupted? The Season 8 Elements arc shows us a version of the four elemental forces: fire, ice, slime, and candy, taking over Ooh and transforming everything in a kind of magical catastrophe. But this arc also suggests that the elemental cycle, in its proper form, is a natural and necessary aspect of the world's magical infrastructure. The elementals are supposed to maintain balance. They are not supposed to dominate. What did that balanced state look like before the Mushroom War disturbed it? What was O's magical ecology in the centuries before Princess Bubblegum was born? What is the full history of Prismo? We know he is the dream of an old man. We know the time room exists outside of normal time. We know he has been granting wishes since before recorded history, that he has watched every moment of every timeline simultaneously from his cosmic living room with its screens and its pickles and its beanbag chairs. We know he was destroyed by the Lich and subsequently resurrected by Jake, and that the version who came back is different in some ineffable way from the version who died, because the old man who dreamed him died too and was replaced by a new dreamer. Is the new Prismo the same Prismo? Are they continuous with the original in any meaningful sense? The show raises this question explicitly and then lets it settle into the background without resolution. What happened to the Rainicorn dog wars that Jake and Lady Rainicorn mention in passing in early episodes? This is a conflict that apparently occurred in the history of Ooh, a war between the dog people and the Rainicorns that was serious enough to leave historical scars on both cultures. The show uses it as backstory flavor and then never explores it. What was the war about? How did it end? What shaped the world we see in the series? What was the original nature of the four elementals before the Catalyst comets and the Mushroom War disrupted their cycle? The show's late seasons feature a return of the elemental forces in a new configuration, but the ancient order of fire and ice and slime and something else, something that eventually became candy, was presumably the world's primary magical infrastructure for millions of years before the war. What were those millennia of elemental stewardship like? What did a world governed by these forces, without the chaos of the Mushroom War and its aftermath, actually look like? These questions are gifts. They are the spaces where your imagination can live, where the world of Adventure Time extends beyond the edges of the screen and into the dark, continuing to exist in the territory between what the show told you and what it implied. And there is one more set of questions, the most personal ones, that the show leaves you with. Not about Oo's history or its cosmic architecture, but about the people you spent 10 seasons with. Is Marceline genuinely happy with who she is after everything? The Stakes miniseries showed her trying to give up her vampirism, to be mortal, to grow old and die the way her mother did, and the way she never got to. She chose to be turned again at the end. She made peace with being immortal, with being the vampire queen, with the 1,000 years she has lived, and the endless ones stretching ahead. But the peace she made was not simple contentment. It was complicated and earned and somewhat fragile, and the show does not pretend otherwise. Is Simon truly okay? He has his mind back. He has his memories. He has survived 1,000 years and come out the other side still recognizably himself, which is, by any measure, extraordinary. But what he does not have is Betty. He will never have Betty. The woman he loved, who tried to save him and could not, is somewhere in the universe wearing the shape of chaos itself. He knows she is out there. He knows she made the choice that saved him. He cannot go to her. He cannot tell her it is okay. He has to live with that. The show acknowledges this. It does not resolve it. Some griefs do not resolve. Some losses just become part of the architecture of a person, part of what makes them who they are, rather than something that can be fixed or moved past. Simon carries Betty the way Oo carries the ruins of the old world, present and invisible and part of everything. These questions are gifts. They are the spaces where your imagination can live, where the world of Adventure Time extends beyond the edges of the screen and into the dark, continuing to exist in the territory between what the show told you and what it implied. Adventure Time is ultimately a story about what happens after the war, after the apocalypse. After the worst thing you can imagine, life reassembles itself. It is stranger than before. It is wilder and more magical, and in many ways, more interesting than what it replaced. But it carries the scar of what ended it everywhere you look. In the ruins under the Candy Hills, in the 1,000-year-old grief that lives behind Marceline's eyes, in the way Simon Petrikov, freed at last from the crown, has to learn how to be a person again in a world that moved on without him. None of this is accidental. The show is asking, from its very first episode, how you go on, how you build something from nothing, how you find meaning in a world that offers equal amounts of wonder and horror, how you stay good when the universe has repeatedly demonstrated that it does not reward goodness with safety. Finn's answer is to keep trying. Jake's answer is to not stress about it and make some bacon pancakes. Simon's answer is to mourn what was lost and find a way to live with it. Marceline's answer is to play music, to translate everything that cannot be spoken into something that can be felt. None of these answers is complete. None of them resolves the mysteries. They just make life possible in the presence of the mysteries, and maybe that is the actual point. And there is something worth sitting with about the way these answers coexist without competing. Each character approaches the same fundamental problem, the problem of how to be alive in a world that is beautiful and terrible in equal measure. And they each find their own way through. There is no universal answer. There is no one correct response to the ruins of civilization, or the death of loved ones, or the discovery that your father is a selfish con man, or the realization that you are the current incarnation of a cosmic force that has been cycling through the universe for billions of years. There are just the answers you find for yourself, cobbled together from experience and friendship, and the things that matter to you specifically, in the hope that your particular answer is good enough to get you through today. The world of Oo is unfinished. It was always unfinished. The ruins are still being discovered. The magic is still being mapped. The dead worlds are still receiving their inhabitants. The comets are still cycling through the dark. And somewhere in a treehouse built on the ruins of what we were, a boy in a white hat is getting up to do good in the world. He does not know everything that came before him. He does not need to. He has today, and today has adventures. And the adventures have meaning because they are happening to someone who cares about them. And caring is what makes meaning possible in a universe that does not hand it out for free. That is the deepest truth in Adventure Time. Buried under all the mysteries, speaking quietly from underneath every unanswered question. The caring matters. The caring is the answer. Even when you do not know where you came from, even when the world you live in was built on catastrophe, even when your father is a cosmic drifter and your best friend is a biological mystery, and the sweetest woman you know is 1,000 years of complicated, and the universe itself is maintained by a sleeping old man whose dreams could stop at any moment. You care about it. You show up for it. You fight for it with everything you have. And the mysteries, all the unresolved, beautiful, terrible mysteries, they are not failures of the story. They are the story. They are the gaps between what we know and what we suspect and what we dream, and those gaps are where we live. That is where imagination goes when the lights are low and the voices are soft and the show is over. But the world it built is still humming quietly inside your head. The land of Ooh goes on. It goes on in the gap between 1,000 years ago and 1,000 years from now. It goes on in the ruins of the old world and the candy-colored present and the strange, undreamed future where another comet is already in transit. It goes on in you, if you have let it in, if you have let those mysteries become your own questions about your own life. If you have let the boy in the white hat remind you that doing good is still worth doing, even when everything around you is strange and broken and uncertain. And then, when the night gets very quiet and the mysteries settle around you like a familiar weight, you close your eyes and the land of Ooh goes on without you for a little while, dreaming its strange and beautiful dreams, holding its secrets close, waiting for morning. If this video helped you drift off somewhere quiet and interesting, please give it a like. It means more than you know, and it helps this channel find more people who need a place to rest their mind. And if you want to come back for the next one, subscribing keeps you in the loop. New videos whenever the land of Ooh has more to whisper. Sleep well wherever you are. The mysteries will still be there when you wake up,